The Guru Question, A Seasoned Reflection by David Christopher Lane. Narrated by Scott R. Smith. Mount San Antonio College, Walnut, California. Copyright 2016, all rights reserved. Dedication to the Seeker in All of Us. Table of Contents. Chapter 1, The Guru Question. Chapter 2, Fakir Chan and the Quest for Hidden Variables in Paranormal Experiences. Chapter 3, The Doubting Meditator. Chapter 4, The Guru Has No Turban. Chapter 5, The Magic of an Elevated Podium. Chapter 6, About the Author. Chapter 1, The Guru Question. The following essay is my response to a series of questions posed by a reader of Brian Hines' blog, Church of the Churchless. Appreciative reader writes, "But I think what you are saying is that you are indeed critiquing the theology not as a layman but as a scientist, as someone who's put in the requisite work in terms of picking up the math and physics and existing theory, in short, in the capacity of the scientist. In your case, this would translate as someone who's acquired the book knowledge, the history of the faith, the details of the theology, and also, crucially, the meditation, and also, even more crucially, the actual inner experiences. Am I right?" David Lane replies, "I think each of us are, at some of our best moments, working scientists in the sense that we observe certain phenomena and try our best to figure out why it is so. We come up with all sorts of hypotheses, and then if we are honest in our inquiry, we test out our guesses against other ideas, and the one that is, relatively, best at explaining the data we tend to accept, even if only tentatively. Thus, when it comes to meditation and spirituality, each one of us has to engage in the experiment and then decide, avoiding as best as possible groupthink and theological tethering, how to interpret what arises, hopefully keeping open-minded to alternative viewpoints." Appreciative reader writes, "Quick aside comment request while on the matter of your experiences. Would you be comfortable sharing those experiences in your own words? Actual personal experiences only, not what's supposed to be. I'd be really interested, fascinated, to be able to learn about that. I understand they ask you not to talk about this sort of thing, and if you're not comfortable breaking that particular tenet of theirs, then it's cool. Although I'm hoping you'll say you find that particular tenet amongst the unreasonable and pointless dictates of Radhaswami Satsang Bayas, and that you will be able to relate to us something of what you've seen within." David Lane replies, "I think one of the underlying reasons that Santmat gurus have argued against revealing one's inner experiences is because they can be so personal and particular. As for myself, and what I suspect is common or more universal, and not merely due to individual peculiarities, I have noticed the following during Shabad Yoga meditation. 1. Prolonged Simran or repetition does help one to keep at the eye focus, and that once this is sufficiently accomplished, the extremities of the body have a very pleasant, at times almost exhilarating, feeling of numbness. In the article, The Science of Going Within, we described the process and theorized that it may have a biochemical basis similar to sleep paralysis. According to adepts and serious students of Shabad Yoga, one of the first signs that the meditation technique is working is the distinct feeling of numbness in the lower extremities. This is coupled with a sense of conscious withdrawal, where one oftentimes intuits that something profound is about to occur, such as entry into a new and luminous state of awareness. The intriguing question, at least from a neurobiological perspective, is to pinpoint biochemically what is happening during this first stage of meditation. It appears that the same chemicals that keep your body relatively still while asleep and dreaming, where one might be surfing, jumping, or flying with arms and legs moving about in all sorts of rotations, may also be activated in deeper stages of meditation. The fundamental difference being that in dreaming, one is usually unconscious of such chemical interferences, whereas in Shabad Yoga, one consciously feels the onslaught of these chemicals becoming operative. In a breakthrough study, two Canadian neuroscientists, Patricia Brooks and John Peever located two neurotransmitters which inhibit bodily movement when dreaming. As reported in the Journal of Neuroscience's press release, during REM sleep, the deep sleep where most recalled dreams occur, muscles that move the eyes and those involved in breathing continue to move. But the most of the body's other muscles are stopped, potentially to prevent injury. In a series of experiments, University of Toronto neuroscientists Patricia L. Brooks and John H. Peever, Ph.D., found that the neurotransmitters gamma-aminobutyric acid and glycine caused REM sleep paralysis in rats by switching off the specialized cells in the brain that allow muscles to be active. This finding reversed earlier beliefs that glycine was a lone inhibitor of these motor neurons. Interestingly, sleep paralysis, where one feels incapable of moving their body during sleep, which is on occasion accompanied by nightmares or visions, may offer a tantalizing clue to what may be transpiring during the first significant stages of Shabad yoga meditation. Sleep paralysis is a transcultural phenomenon and can be either a chronic condition where one's sleep patterns can be dramatically impacted or occur in only isolated and rare episodes. Sleep paralysis can range from 1 minute to an hour. A number of theories have been proposed to explain why it occurs, but it appears that such disruptive sleep patterns are directly correlated to a disjunction between REM and wakefulness, where an erstwhile smooth transition between such states is somehow damaged or altered. Shabad yoga is a relatively simple technique, arguably dating back to the pre-Vedic period in India, which is designed to induce a conscious, out-of-body experience that is facilitated by a threefold method of constant repetition of certain words, listening to internal, subtle sounds, and focusing on inner lights. As Charan Singh, the late spiritual master at Radhaswami Satsang Beas, explains, the current electric or battery charge you feel is the withdrawal of the spirit currents from the body. This will gradually change to numbness of the body and travel upward. Please do not become frightened over this withdrawal of the soul current from the body. Shabad yogis in general, however, have not tried to correlate their inner journeys with a deeper neurobiological understanding, since their practice has been intertwined for centuries with a Gnostic-like theology, where the body and the spirit are viewed as distinct entities. However, if Shabad yoga meditation is indeed a neurobiological process, then there should be telltale signs of such that can be quantified by accurately measuring the levels of neurotransmitters such as gamma-aminobutyric acid and glycine in the brain, while one is feeling the sensation of conscious paralysis while meditating. Indeed, one wonders if there are not chemical ways of inducing the same effect in non-meditators and seeing whether or not they report similar experiences as their Shabad yoga counterparts. Our hypothesis is that Shabad yoga practitioners who experience the onslaught of numbness in their extremities, which shouldn't be confused with paresthesia, the sensation that one feels when one's foot goes to sleep, during deep meditation are experiencing a biochemical process that is similar to what happens when we are asleep, and certain neurochemicals manifest to inhibit bodily movements. In other words, Shabad yoga induces a conscious sleep paralysis of sorts. If this is correct, we should be able to ascertain whether or not gamma-aminobutyric acid and glycine levels are operative. 2. The sound current, or Shabad, is a real phenomenon, since it appears that almost anyone can hear internal sounds within him or herself during moments of concentration. It also has variations of subtleness and intensity, and when the meditation is going smoothly, such sounds can have a deeply pulling effect, such that one can have sensations of being pulled out of the body and a rushing feeling. The larger twin questions, however, are, what is causing this sound, and what does it ultimately mean? Sant Mat and Radhaswami and Nad Yoga related groups have already decided on the ontological significance of Shabad and have made it the cornerstone of their respective theologies and claim it is the manifestation of the Supreme Being. God's calling card, so to say. If we take a more agnostic position and avoid the religious overlays that are invariably intertwined with Shabad experiences, then we can keep open to a multiplicity of explanations, some of which may be purely physiological in origination. But uncovering a physical basis to the sound current shouldn't be surprising, since there is nothing demeaning when relating consciousness and its manifestations to material substances, especially when matter itself, given its hierarchical structure, is as mysterious as saying something is purely spiritual. Yet, when a religious path has predicted its entire superstructure on a particular interpretation, as we see in Shabbat yoga circles, that same religion will tend to resist explanations that differ with its core dogma. This is why calling Radhaswami a science is fraught with difficulties, given its present ideology. This is also why reading and understanding Fakir Chand's life and work can be so controversial and liberating. Fakir has a more open-ended approach to the subject, despite being appointed a guru in the tradition by Shiv Bhat Lal. Fakir repeatedly stated that he could be wrong about his interpretations and asked other Shabbat yoga masters to correct him if that were the case. Moreover, Fakir provided a much more psychological understanding of the inner regions and radically exclaimed that all inner visions, regardless of their majesty, were entirely self-generated and a product of one's own mind. Appreciative Reader writes, "What you're saying, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is this. Just as in science you have observations, basis which you build hypotheses, thus in this case you have experiences and insights, and basis those experiences and insights you're building up a theology. So the theology is not revealed. What is revealed are the experiences and insights, the counterpart of science's observations, while the theology is the attempted interpretation of those experiences, the hypotheses in other words. Am I right? And basis your own experiences, as well as what you've read, Fakir Chand for instance, you're questioning elements of the theology." David Lane replies, "Yes, what you write here is spot on. We seem predisposed to connect our inner experiences with a present cartography such that we start to believe that they are one and the same. We have a projective arc, similar in import to what Freud had discovered with his patients who invariably transferred all sorts of motivations on his part, never recognizing them as their own. The difficulty is that when one has an extraordinary experience, as I did with speaking in tongues at the age of 15, there is often a deep desire to make sense of it. So we look around, and depending on our culture, we try to fit the numinous encounter within a given framework, such as I did when I was given the Bible as a roadmap for understanding glossolalia. Once this happens, we then entangle our inner experience with an outer theology, giving it more power than it might deserve. This became uber clear to me when I examined Kirpal Singh's claim that he could give inner experiences to his disciples on the day of their initiation or during a special meditation sitting, as I explained in the Kirpal statistic. It turns out that almost everybody has the inherent ability to see inner light and hear inner sound. Moreover, almost everybody has the capacity to have an out-of-body experience and behold wondrous inner visions. You don't need to go to an Indian guru to have such experiences. Indeed, you don't need to go anywhere at all. In the early 1980s, when I was teaching religious studies at a Catholic high school, I tried several meditation experiments with my students which convinced me that Kirpal Singh and other gurus like him were taking undue credit for their disciples' inner experiences. In my trial meditation sessions, I informed my students beforehand about the possibility of seeing inner lights and hearing inner sounds. Naturally, given the boring routine of secondary education, my students were intrigued. I informed them that I knew of an ancient yoga technique that would facilitate their inner voyages. I turned the lights off, instructed them briefly about closing their eyes gently and looking for sparks of light at the proverbial third eye. I told them that I would touch some students on the forehead lightly with my fingers. They meditated for some 5 minutes. I then proceeded to ask them about their experiences. Kirpal Singh invariably did such a process directly after his initiation ceremonies. He also kept a running tally of how many saw stars and so on, something which I have called the Kirpal statistic. To my amazement, since I felt that Kirpal Singh and others were actually transmitting spiritual power, the majority of my students reported seeing light. A few students even claimed to have visions of personages in the middle of the light. Others reported hearing subtle sounds and the like. I repeated the experiment on 4 other classes that day. I have also in the past 10 years conducted the same experiment on my college students, both undergraduate and graduate. The result, though differing in terms of absolute numbers, is remarkably the same. The majority see and hear something. It doesn't take a neuropsychologist or a sociologist trained in statistics to realize that Kirpal Singh and others were simply tapping into an already built reservoir of meditational possibilities. Religious devotees seem overly eager to give up responsibility for their own neurological happenings, believing instead that it takes a master to draw their attention within. This may or may not be the case, and I am not implying that gurus don't have anything good to offer, but one thing is certain. Kirpal's claims, and others like his, cannot be divorced, as they often are in Sant-Mat-related groups, from an initiate's own culture and psychological field of interplay. It is that interplay, that acceptance as fact of a guru's method and the disciple's own inherent capacity, neurological or mystical, for inner experiences, which fuels the claims of would-be masters. It seems wise to me, in light of near-death experiences and the plethora of other meditation accounts, to inspect how we see and hear during our inner voyages of light and sound. Then we may be able to understand why such experiences can occur to almost anybody, anywhere, anytime. It may also help us contextualize and appraise the claims of gurus like Kirpal Singh, who insist on taking credit for their disciples' wondrous visions. If, as I have suggested, that anybody can act as a conduit for such otherworldly experiences, then Kirpal and gurus like him should be judged on some other criteria, since their claims for uniqueness and exclusiveness are anything but unique and exclusive. The Kirpal statistic is exactly that, the probable outcome that the majority of meditators, provided the necessary instructions in Shabad or Nad yoga practice, will see and hear something. Appreciative reader writes, Gurinder Singh steadfastly refusing to directly engage with crucial questions, that too appears distinctly fishy. What you say about large numbers and too little time is true, I suppose, but surely answering crucial questions squarely is one of the chief functions of the guru or sheikh. Yes, I know about the inner guidance theory. I'll take that with a pinch of salt, unless someone can say that they themselves have received such inner guidance from the guru. Have you, David? Although I suppose there is always the Fakir Chand interpretation of even that inner guidance, should such guidance actually have been forthcoming, so that the inner guru is seen as no more than a mental projection, or something like that. Yes, I've read a bit on Fakir Chand's experiences and views after finding out about him from Brian's blog, especially that part where his followers say they saw him and were guided and or helped by him, but Fakir Chand himself did nothing nor was aware of anything of this kind. In which case, clearing people's genuine doubts, that is to say teaching, would become one of the prime duties of the guru, right? Which would make Gurinder Singh's shying away repeatedly from tough questions look even more suspicious. And why would someone keep quiet about this? The only answer that suggests itself is to perpetuate the myth about themselves. That's plain dishonest and underhand, isn't it? What is your own hypothesis on all this, David? What would you say is the role of the guru, then? You seem to agree with Fakir Chand, in which case, why do we even need a guru? I mean guru as defined by Radhaswami Satsang Bayas. There are others that define a guru merely as a teacher, which is a wholly separate and acceptable definition. He isn't God in human form. He isn't some kind of supernatural conduit. So all he is a teacher, right? Can't you have 4 of them at the same time, then, or 40, or none? David Lane replies, You raise some very elemental and important questions here. Let me see if I can tackle the Fakir Chand issue first. It has been my experience that Bayas-related gurus, and those related to Dialbag, Swami Bag, and People Mandi, have distanced themselves from Fakir's more sweeping revelations, particularly what the outer guru knows and doesn't know about the inner state of their disciples. I remember the strange reaction I got from the Dara administration, specifically Professor K.S. Narang, who was chairman of publications and later chairman of the Dara board back in the winter of 1981, about me wanting to publish Fakir Chand's autobiography, which Fakir had kindly dictated in Urdu and had translated at my request. Fakir had only died just 3 months prior, on September 11, 1981, and I was keen to finalize a printed version of the book for larger distribution. Prior to visiting the Dera, that session I had sent a proof copy of The Unknowing Sage, the title I give to Fakir's autobiography, and a copy of my MA thesis, Radhaswami Mat, which was a genealogical description of how Radhaswami developed since the death of its founder, Shiv Dayal Singh. I can still vividly recall meeting with Professor Narang in his administrative office at the Dera and how he tried to convince me not to publish Fakir's narrative or my MA thesis. It struck me as quite strange, since just prior the same administration had asked for several copies of my work on Ekankar so that they could distribute it to their Western representatives. Something didn't settle right for me at the time. Narang's words, which apparently came directly from Charan Singh, were that I would be doing no service to Sant Mat. I protested and explained that Fakir's experiences were unique and of great benefit to those embarked on spiritual quest, since he was so frank and honest in his descriptions. Instead of engaging me with what Fakir had realized in his life, Narang tried to cast dispersions on Fakir's character. I was taken aback by this tactic, since it appeared to me, even at that time, that the Dera should be more magnanimous about a mystic who had just died, even if they may have disagreed with his findings. My gut feeling was that Fakir Chand's revelations about how little the Guru knows hit a sore spot among the Dera hierarchy, since it contradicted the status quo. I say this precisely because even if the Beas Gurus were much more knowing than Fakir, and were the perfect masters their literature describes, they would understand that Fakir's revelations would help explain lesser gurus and how their respective disciples get all sorts of miraculous visions, even if they had no power whatsoever. But Beas didn't see it this way. Instead, they saw it as a challenge. This too would be fine with me if Beas would openly and clearly explain, with evidence and not merely anecdotes, how exactly Fakir Chand was mistaken. Instead, when I pushed this issue, the only responses I got were elliptical and couched in mitigating language that could be taken in several different ways. I distinctly remember being at the Beas train station as I was getting ready to depart and having a sinking feeling in my stomach that the Dera was not being as straightforward as they should be. Something felt amiss, at least to me. I went ahead and published The Unknowing Sage, and even published the edited section of it for The Laughing Man magazine in the United States a few months later in 1982, which was widely distributed. I also resisted the Dera's attempt to have me curtail my researchers into a early Radhaswami history, even though I knew they were touchy, insecure about their early connections and disassociations from the Agra Satsang. When it came to my PhD dissertation at UCSD, I got a letter from Professor Narang requesting that I should not publish such material. Again, I compared and contrasted this with how the Dera welcomed my Ekankar research, which was much more controversial, with how sensitive they were about delving into early Radhaswami succession history. It should be stated that the Dera has been much less forthcoming than almost any other satsang about releasing pertinent information about their development. Even though I was not initiated at the time and working as Professor Juergensmeyer's research assistant for the express purpose of developing the most comprehensive guru genealogical history to date, the Dera officials balked when I asked them pointed questions about their relationship with the Taran Taran Satsang, founded by Baba Bhaga Singh, and its then present leader, Sri Pratap Singh. Side note, Pratap Singh was succeeded by his son, Kohar Singh. Whenever I wrote letters to Professor Narang or others at the Dera trying to unearth certain key historical facts, I was only given the scantiest of facts. It is a matter of historical record that the Dera has been somewhat duplicitous in its reconstruction of early Radhaswami history. For instance, a close comparison of the first English translation of Pratap Singh's letters to Sawan Singh and Bibi Ruko after Jaimal Singh's death, published 5 decades ago, with the second and unabridged translation, printed 30 years later, shows a concerted effort early on to mislead readers on certain core issues, including the status given to Jaimal Singh and the directives concerning initiation. Beas's bowdlerizing of history to its own favor is unmistakable and, I am sure, is common with almost all other religious movements as well. But this doesn't then mean that we should turn a blind eye to such manipulations. I say all this primarily because it seems to me that Bayas's reaction to Fakir Chand is one of an organizational concern, since his revelations cast a pale shadow on the theological hype that is spliced throughout their most popular texts. Fakir Chand claims, and there is no reason to doubt his memory on this, given how forthcoming he has been on other matters, that he went to Sawan Singh early in his tenure to be relieved of his duty as a guru, since he knew that if he told the unvarnished truth, it would cause a controversy. He states that Sawan not only backed his ministry, but even admitted that he couldn't be as honest as Fakir given the constrictions of his large and growing organization. So yes, I do think that Gurinder Singh and Bayas want to have their cake and eat it too. At one end, we hear that Gurinder can respond in a very human and unknowing fashion, and at the other, continue to publish books where it is repeatedly claimed that the gurus at Bayas are perfect and are God in human form. Whereas Agra gurus have been orthodox or fundamentalist in its doctrines, Radhaswami Mad is the highest religion of all, and Bayas masters more paradoxical, depending on the audience. Fakir Chand, based as he was in Hoshiarpur, has been heretical and his teachings considered a radical heterodoxy. It is little wonder, therefore, that Fakir's revelations have been met at best with unconvincing refutations, and at worst with uncomfortable silence. Fakir Chand was very upfront about the dishonesty he saw in Sant Mat gurus, and he was not in the least shy in calling them out on it, even by name. As Fakir himself argued, my physical form appears in visions to many of my satsangis and helps them to tide over some of their difficulties. I receive numerous reports of this effect from the satsangis concerned, orally and by letters. In my heart of hearts, I know for certain that I do not know where and when these visions arise, and help them miraculously, nor do I produce them. Then how does it happen? What is the explanation for this? I believe that the intensified faith of these devout persons becomes creative and produces these results. Many so-called gurus misappropriate the credit for similar happenings which take place in their disciples, whose own true faith should be held responsible for those results. By the lack of moral courage and honesty on the part of pseudo-gurus, credulous disciples are kept in the dark and fleeced under fake pretenses. I alert the faithful but simple-minded satsangis to beware of such sneaks and their false claims. Cited in the new book, The Projective Arc, Guru Visions and Theological Tethering. I think the guru can be extremely helpful in the spiritual quest provided that he or she is a transparency to our own innermost yearnings and not as a catcher's mitt. Undoubtedly, bhakti is a powerful force and very helpful in meditation. But there is a paradoxical catch-22 in this dyad. The more one values one's master, the greater one's expectations become about that person. So when a disciple thinks his guru is God, it can act as a tremendous force in focusing one's mind during meditation, not to mention outer darshan during satsang. Such bhakti does indeed work as a sort of spiritual aphrodisiac, even if the guru in question has no power whatsoever. But despite the obvious fact, the disciple is doing all the heavy lifting in the relationship. Since he is doing the projecting, he or she must actually believe that the guru is the one with supreme power. Thus, if the devotee finds out, like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, that the master is merely human, it is really quite difficult to get as energized as before. Ignorance of a guru's lack of power is indeed a pathway to a certain form of bliss. This is akin to what happens when one is mesmerized by a famous person, a movie actor, a singer, a model, and then sees them in person for the first time. If they are really enamored with the star, they get an indescribable rush when coming into contact with them. But if they see through the star-making machinery, to quote Joni Mitchell, that luminous rush dissipates. Perhaps this is why the guru game works in the beginning, provided that the disciple can overwhelmingly convince him or herself that the person initiating them is indeed God in human form. Otherwise, if they pull the curtain too soon, like Toto, and see only a balloonist from Kansas, or in our case, an Indian man with a nicely tied turban, then all that projected energy goes away. Now, this doesn't always have to be the case, but it does seem to be such with the majority who find out that their so-called perfect master doesn't live up to the literature's hyped billing. Perhaps this catch-22 is why Beas and other related gurus are reticent about following Fakir Chand's lead, because it would cause many disciples to forego the path. Simply put, if you think your guru is God, you are much more willing to put in hours of meditation and hours of seva. If, however, you think your guru is merely human and without requisite magical abilities, since it is your own faith and devotion creating the internal fireworks, then the urge to perform extraordinary devotions may slacken, if not devolve altogether. Of course, the guru interplay doesn't have to be this way. If the teacher can serve as a transparency to oneself, who consistently forces the disciple to look within and not to some external icon or to serve the needs of an organization, then perhaps having such a guide can be liberating. To be sure, Satmat gurus do talk this way. The real path is within you. But far too often, the student gets enveloped into the needs of the institution that entraps one into its unique theological net. All of this is quite understandable, and Max Weber has written at length about the routinizing of charisma and how a small group inevitably turns bureaucratic the larger it becomes. If you look at the vast numbers now following Gurinder Singh, it is little wonder that he must exercise tremendous restrictions in order to keep his organization under control and still thrive. One must acknowledge that Gurinder is in a very difficult position, and how he keeps the whole satsang afloat is impressive indeed. But this in turn doesn't mean that one has to agree with his approach or his views on differing subjects. I, for one, can appreciate that on one end of the spectrum, he wishes to act as the spiritual CEO and expand the satsang and its centers worldwide. But what may be imperative from an organizational standpoint may not dovetail with what certain individuals seek and desire from a spiritual path. As to your question about how many gurus one can have, I think it all depends on how we view the teacher in question. Certainly in life we have innumerable guides, but when it comes to forming tight relationships with others, we tend to have very few close partners, since it requires so much time and energy, not to mention the most dreaded of words, commitment. I think quite frankly it is an individual affair and depends almost entirely on one's own perceived needs and desires at the time. Appreciative Reader writes, Brian's written a blog post where he links the primacy of the gurus in Radhaswami Satsang Beas to a cultural trope more than anything else. That there is such a cultural trope is very true, but do you yourself agree that the primacy of guru is no more than just that? What does your own experience say? Do we really need a guru, with capital G, at all, as opposed to just a teacher? I'm looking for personal answers, basis personal experience, not pro forma dogma. But I don't think you'd proffer pro forma dogma anyway, so perhaps that qualification was unnecessary. David Lane replies, Fakir Chand had a very interesting take on this whole guru business and the need for one. In his first few letters to me, given how young I was, he suggested that such yearnings are due to some deficiency in our early life, and those who are better acclimatized to their surroundings and circumstances tend not to get obsessive about such spiritual pursuits. So to answer your question, I think no one needs a guru at all, except, and the emphasis is rich with irony, if one believes that he or she needs one. Silly analogy, but no one really needs a living teacher to learn how to surf, unless, of course, one thinks it is necessary. It is our needs, our desires, which fuels and sustains the master-disciple paradigm. This doesn't mean that gurus are not helpful. Just like surf instructors, they can be. But they can also be detrimental as well. One doesn't have to look any further than to John Roger Hinkins, Satya Sai Baba, and Takar Singh to underline this point. In other words, I don't buy the theological dogma that the transcendental being of the universe, if there is such a one, has somehow closed the pearly gates to all and sundry unless they got initiated by Baba I Am the Only One in the hill station of Simla. Charan Singh said on many occasions that critics are our best friends. I think there is much truth in that. Charan also gave a very wise piece of advice to me and others when we were young, and it has stuck with me all these years. He wrote that even if you spend your whole life researching and questioning the path, it is not time wasted, but time gained. I think Radhaswami Satsang Beas is better served by its critics than those keeping silent because of blind allegiance. Chapter 2. Fakir Chand and the Quest for Hidden Variables in Paranormal Experiences. Psychic stories usually sound more psychic when we have less information about the event. Fakir Chand was a remarkable sage who practiced Surat Shabad Yoga for over 75 years and who became an acknowledged master within the tradition. He was, however, considered to be a renegade by other gurus because he believed that religious visions, miracles, and other supernatural phenomena were, in truth, projections of one's own mind. As Fakir himself clearly explained, "Now, you see, no Jesus Christ comes from without in anybody's visions. No Rama, no Krishna, no Buddha, and no Baba Fakir comes from without to anybody. The visions are only because of the impressions and suggestions that a disciple has already accepted in his mind. These impressions and suggestions appear to him like a dream. Nobody comes from without. This is the plain truth." Fakir first came to this realization in Iraq at the end of World War I, after being told by his fellow satsangis that he had appeared to them in a vision and saved their lives during a heated battle. Fakir was himself under duress at the time, and had never even thought of his comrades, and was completely unaware of his miraculous appearance to them. Later, when Fakir was appointed to be a guru in his own right by Maharishi Shivbrat Lal, he started to receive hundreds, nay thousands of reports from India, Europe, and America about wondrous visions and occurrences concerning him and his spiritual powers. Yet Fakir remained completely unaware of such happenings and was stupefied by such accounts. This prompted him to question and doubt the visions he had of his own guru and the like. Fakir became convinced that all such phenomena were self-generated projections, but that naive devotees worldwide were mistakenly attributing them to their respective spiritual leaders and teachings. Because of this psychological transference, unscrupulous gurus, masters, and mystics were deriving untold status and power, since they never revealed their own ignorance in such proceedings. Analogously, this was akin to what the Wizard of Oz was doing to Dorothy and her friends by not telling them the truth that he was only a balloonist from Kansas who actually had no magic power whatsoever. Fakir Chand then started to unlock the modus operandi behind why certain visions occurred to him. He also became skeptical of psychic phenomena, even questioning the most treasured experiences of his early life that he had always believed were divinely orchestrated. Fakir suspected that there were alternative explanations for why he had such experiences, but he was blinded from exploring them because of his deeply religious nature. In this pursuit, Fakir focused on looking for hidden variables behind why he had such strange visions and synchronicities. Fakir recalls having remarkable visions of Lord Krishna almost daily until a startling incident occurred which made him doubt the verticality of his numinous encounters. As Fakir explained to Professor Mark Juergensmeyer back in the summer of 1978, "Once I was going and Lord Krishna was going ahead of me. There was some cow dung lying on the ground. That image of Lord Krishna asked me to eat that cow dung. I took a morsel of cow dung and ate it. When I reached home, I thought that in no religious book is it written that an image of Lord Krishna or Rama has ever directed any disciple to eat cow dung, so I thought it was not the real Krishna who had asked me to eat the cow dung." A similar thing transpired when Fakir found himself completely distraught in his longing for God. He prayed and wept continuously for 24 hours and then had a lucid vision of his future guru, Shivbrat Lal, which included his exact address in Lahore. Fakir then wrote to his mysterious guru at the address he saw in his vision. After 10 months of writing, a letter a month, he finally received a reply from the guru, who did, in fact, reside at that exact place. This convinced Fakir that this was a genuinely psychic intuition. It was only years later, after Fakir had realized his own unknowingness with regard to miracles and by locations attributed to him, that he pondered over whether there were hidden variables that would better explain such transmundane events. Because his guru, Shivbrat Lal, was a prolific writer and widely published throughout the Punjab, Fakir Chand confessed that it was very likely that he may have actually seen one of his guru's magazines, with his ashram address, several months or weeks before he had his nocturnal vision. Fakir was so awestruck at the time of his psychic experience that he had not taken the time to consider the very obvious possibility that he had already seen the guru and his whereabouts in a publication, but had simply forgotten the details. D. Scott Rogo, the famous paranormal investigator, who was unfortunately murdered at the young age of 40, also concluded that most, if not all, metaphysical episodes were really psychic projections that are produced by the minds of the observers themselves. Of course, this doesn't in itself categorically dismiss the entire field of parapsychology, but only sends a very necessary warning shot to anyone interested in this area to be extraordinarily cautious when postulating something as inexplicable when, given enough time and attention to detail, it may be likely that hitherto hidden variables may better explain the mystery at hand. Fakir Chand repeatedly pointed this out to his spiritual colleagues and followers who seemed overly eager to accept any revelation as divine. To support Fakir Chand's acute observations, I remembered an unusual story that happened to me back in the mid-1980s. Fate magazine, a widely circulated magazine devoted to true and strange reports of the strange and unknown. As I retold it in the article, "The Guru Has No Turban," I recall getting a phone call from a Catholic woman in Oklahoma, I believe, who got my number from the editors of Fate magazine. Apparently, she had been praying or meditating one day, and she had a vision of a guru with a long white beard and turban who informed her that she should learn more about him that day. Later, she happened to pick up a copy of Fate magazine that contained an article I wrote entitled "The Enchanted Land, A Journey with the Saints of India," which described my visits with various Shabad yoga gurus in India. When she saw the picture of Charan Singh that accompanied the article, she was thrilled, since, as she alleges, it was the same Charan Singh who had appeared to her during her prayer or meditation. She was so enthralled, in fact, that she tracked me down and asked me for more information. Being somewhat skeptical by nature of transpersonal or paranormal happenings, even when connected with my path, I advised her to write a letter to Charan Singh about it and ask his opinion. She did, and a few weeks later he wrote her a long reply in which he stated that the vision was, more or less, a projection of her own mind and that he had nothing to do with it. Yes, it is certainly true that humans experience all sorts of weird coincidences from time to time, and that on occasion mysterious events arise. But even here one has to be doubly cautious not to prematurely rush to explain them as beyond physics. Perhaps a bit more patience, a bit more skepticism, and a lot more analysis is necessary. Otherwise, a simpler or more mundane explanation will be overlooked. A pregnant example of this comes from Dr. Ronald Siegel and his book, Fire in the Brain. During an exceptional experiment with psychedelics, a group of volunteers, whom he termed psychonauts, had all witnessed the same transfixing and demonic eyeballs, which haunted them and couldn't be rationally explained away. Why did everyone have the same vision? Ronald Siegel spent weeks trying to unlock the enigma, but to his utter surprise, he discovered that just prior to their drug experiments, each student in preparation for their journeys had been required to watch the same slideshow presentation. What Siegel hadn't immediately realized was that one of the slides, which he accidentally included in the presentation, was an artistic depiction of demonic eyes, the very same eyes that all the psychonauts had reported seeing while under a hallucinogenic. As Siegel pointed out, the demon was nothing more than the surprise of a disturbing image spontaneously retrieved from memory. Rather than feeling disappointed that a real demon did not exist, I was surprised and humbled to discover that internal images can be powerful enough to be mistaken for external ones. Disturbing images have a way of burrowing their way into our memories, even after a single exposure. This is an important lesson here, since the variable in this case, a forgotten slide, was so obvious that, ironically, it was for all intents and purposes hidden. If Ronald Siegel hadn't investigated further, he and his associates may have elevated the strange vision from its pedestrian origins to cosmic dimensions. So it is the case, I suspect, with many so-called psychic encounters of the first kind. For instance, Ever since I read Autobiography of a Yogi when I was 11 years old, I was mesmerized with Self-Realization Fellowship's claims that Yogananda's body after death didn't decay as one might suspect. Self-Realization Fellowship, or SRF, has long championed this remarkable feature as suggestive of something divine. Yet Jeffrey Falk, a one-time follower of SRF's Kriya Yoga path, demonstrates that there was nothing unique or even special about what happened to Yogananda's body after death. Yogananda shuffled off the mortal coil for the final time, entered Mahasamadhi in 1952. Immediately thereafter, SRF has since widely claimed his untenanted body began manifesting a divine incorruptibility. A notarized statement signed by the director of Forest Lawn Memorial Park testified no physical disintegration was visible in his body even 20 days after death. This state of perfect preservation of a body is, so far as we know from mortuary annals, an unparalleled one. Yogananda's body was apparently in a phenomenal state of immutability. In Yogananda, 1998. The editors of Self-Realization Fellowship, in SRF 1976, then waxed eloquent. This is as it should be. Paramahansa, flawlessly perfect soul that he was, could not possibly have chosen for tenement a body that was not in pre-established harmony with the purest conceivable soul. And yet, as Robert Carroll has noted, the statement, quoted by SRF, of the director of Forest Lawn, Harry T. Rowe, is accurate but incomplete. Mr. Rowe also mentioned that he observed a brown spot on Yogananda's nose after 20 days, a sign that the body was not perfectly preserved. In any case, the SRF's claim that lack of physical disintegration is an extraordinary phenomenon is misleading. The state of the yogi's body is not unparalleled, but common. A typical embalmed body will show no notable desiccation for 1 to 5 months after burial without the use of refrigeration or creams to mask odors. Some bodies are well preserved for years after burial. And indeed, with regard to embalming, in the full text of Mr. Rowe's letter, reprinted in the SRF published 1976 Paramahansa Yogananda in Memoriam, we find, Paramahansa Yogananda's body was embalmed on the night of March 8th, with the quantity of fluid which is customarily used in any body of similar size. And the miracle then was, what exactly? Apparently only that the body was relatively well preserved, even with the funeral home having used no creams to prevent mold, in addition to the embalming. Yet even there, Harry Edwards' 1995 research in soliciting the opinions of a pair of independent, licensed embalmers disclosed the following experience on their parts. I'm sure we've had bodies for 2 or 3 months with good preservation. This is not unusual. Creams are not necessary. Preservation for 20 days through embalming is not unusual. We can keep a body a month or 2 without interral. An embalming fluid with a lanolin base will have humectant, which prevents dehydration, which is the major concern. As Edwards' embalmers further noted, the circulation of air around Yogananda's body would have been largely prevented by the casket's heavy glass lid, with that too impeding the desiccation of the body. So the miracle then was, what exactly? Perhaps only that SRF has gotten away, for over 50 years, with presenting a phenomenon which is perfectly ordinary, as if it was some kind of sign to prove the divinity of their eminently human founder. While there may indeed be a psychic realm, it behooves us to look first for ordinary explanations of the supernatural, since it is far too easy to neglect those psychic elements that may explain that which we too often take to be inexplicable. I appreciate that it is very difficult to doubt our own experiences in this regard, since they tend to impart so much meaning and magic to our day-to-day lives. But if we fail to do so, we run the very real risk of mistaking a mirage for reality. I know this from my own personal experience because I once witnessed what I thought at the time was an airtight case of clairvoyance. I remember the exact date and place it occurred. It was December 5th, 1986, and I was in Bombay, now Mumbai, India, attending a private dinner with my late guru, Charan Singh, of Radhaswami Satsang Beas. He had invited a select group of about 15 individuals from around the world to have a tight-knit affair, and I felt extremely fortunate to have been chosen. Yet just as the evening was to begin, and after pleasantries had been exchanged, Charan noticed that one of his guests had not yet arrived. He then asked one of his Sevadars for an explanation, and the driver, who was designated to pick up the elderly woman at the entrance of the Holiday Inn, related that the woman was nowhere to be found. At this point, Charan closed his eyes and told his driver in no uncertain terms precisely where she could be found. The driver looked exacerbated and mentioned that it seemed very unlikely that given her advanced age, she would actually be in another side of town walking around at a park. But Charan was insistent, and the driver went off as directed. Barely 20 minutes later, the driver and the lady showed up for dinner. The Sevadar appeared completely baffled by the whole interlude and was duly impressed by Charan Singh's apparent clairvoyance. I too was wonderstruck by the episode. Now, on the surface of it, this little story may seem indicative of something psychic, particularly given the speed at which it was resolved. There is no doubt that the driver felt that Charan Singh had supernatural powers, and those in attendance and those who witnessed the event thought so too. But perhaps we need to throw a wet blanket on the proceedings and look at this incident with a more objective eye. Is it really out of the realm of probability that Charan Singh, knowing Bombay fairly well, he had traveled there yearly for over 4 decades, that he might have rightly surmised where the old woman may have mistakenly ended up? I think not, particularly when one stops to consider that the park where the driver found her was the very same park Charan Singh had given satsang earlier that week. Psychic stories usually sound more psychic when we have less information about the event. Arguably, the more details we get about a supernatural circumstance, the more ordinary it turns out to be. This might not always be the case, but it is highly suspicious that the deeper we dig, the less miraculous the event turns out to be. Maybe we should heed this warning, and instead of prematurely rushing in where angels fear to tread, we can take the long view and let our critical investigations season and ripen. In this light, it is not a situation of denying a priori the metaphysical, but rather that we should take the supernatural claims seriously enough not to let impostors compromise their value. Perhaps a skeptical psychic isn't merely an odd oxymoron, but a necessary imperative. Chapter 3. The Doubting Meditator. Is Radhaswami really a science? A cautionary note. If science proves some belief of Buddhism wrong, then Buddhism will have to change. Tenzin Gyatso. In questions of science, the authority of 1,000 is not worth the humble reasoning of a single individual. Galileo Galilei. You cannot meet God until you carry within yourself the dagger of disbelief. Kabir. Radhaswami Satsangis, particularly those at Beas and at Dialbag, have advertised themselves as a scientific enterprise. However, on closer inspection, they both seem to have much more in common with religion than science, despite their concerted efforts to create a science of the soul. Ninian Smart, the late professor of religious studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and author of many seminal books, argues that religion has 7 major dimensions. 1. Myths. 2. Rituals. 3. Experiences. 4. Doctrines. 5. Ethics. 6. Social aspect. And 7. Material forms. Radhaswami fits Smart's model almost to a T, and by his yardstick would be catalogued as a religion, albeit a new and emerging one worldwide. Gurinder Singh, the current head of Radhaswami Satsang Beas, and P.S. Satsangi, the current head of Dialbag Satsang Agra, want to emphasize how Radhaswami serves as a scientific model for exploring higher states of consciousness. Yet their respective definitions of science are invariably intertwined with a specific theological agenda, and as such gives one pause about whether Radhaswami is really a science or just wants to appear scientific so that its spiritual practices and aims will be taken more seriously. This came into sharp focus for me this past year when I gave a talk in India at the International Conference on Quantum and Nanocomputing Systems and Applications at the Dialbag Educational Institute in Agra. I argue that understanding how consciousness evolved in the first place was elemental, and that would-be mystics should also be trained skeptics. Just as we can be deceived by our brain in this world, what my wife Andrea calls the cerebral mirage, without being aware of it, so too can the meditator being duped by his or her interior explorations. It is a simple point, but one which has devastating implications for any religion that believes that it has already uncovered the ultimate truth of the universe. If our senses can, and do, betray us about what we see, hear, and smell, so too can our consciousness mislead us about the reality of our inner experiences. The present guru at Dialbag, P.S. Satsangi, heard my entire talk, and later, after some impromptu remarks I made at a panel discussion, he spoke for about 10 minutes expressing his disagreement with my emphasis on being skeptical of the mystical. It seemed as if my wife Andrea, whose talk was even more pointed than my own, and I had hit a sensitive nerve, since we were calling into question the absoluteness of Radhaswami's cosmological schema. It appears that Radhaswamis want to embrace science, provided that it dovetails with their own belief system. Not once have I ever heard a Radhaswami guru, with the notable exception of Baba Fakir Chand, admit that a long-held doctrine or tenet was mistaken. Not once has a Dialbag or Beas guru corrected a previous master in their lineage as being mistaken. Why? How can Radhaswami really be taken seriously as a scientific path if one cannot question its very foundation? While it is certainly true that Radhaswami is experientially based and advocates a systemic meditational technique, it never questions or doubts its founder's writings at any point. Indeed, it accepts Shiv Dayal's Sar Bachan as gospel and attempts to fit any and all scientific discoveries within its boundaries. This is like physicists today, never questioning Aristotle or never doubting Newton. Science progresses precisely because it doubts any and all authorities, even those with esteemed reputations like Albert Einstein or Niels Bohr. Biologists don't bow down with bended knee to everything Charles Darwin wrote in On Origin of Species, despite how much they respect his insights. Chemists don't take everything Linus Pauling wrote hook, line, and sinker. To be scientific is to question, to be corrected regardless of what status one might hold in the pantheon of reason. Have Radhaswami gurus at Beas and Agra demonstrated this same kind of apprehension about its leaders and their history? No, and herein lies the heart of the problem with Radhaswamis billing themselves as a science. They want the prestige that a scientific aura gives them without undergoing the hard work of trial and error that is endemic to any true science. There can be no ultimate statements in science. There can be no statements in science which cannot be tested, and therefore none which cannot, in principle, be refuted by falsifying some of the conclusions which can be deduced from them. Karl Popper. Is it reasonable to call various Radhaswami Satsang Beas centers throughout the United States as Science of the Soul research centers, when none of these places have laboratories or research facilities of any kind? Instead, they are big halls designed for satsangs where the guru or his designated representative gives talks for an hour or so based on the teachings of previous saints. No deep investigation or experiments or analysis is ever conducted at any one of these centers. What is Radhaswami Satsang Beas trying to accomplish by this sleight of hand entitlement? There are probably several reasons, but not one of them has anything to do with science as it is generally known and practiced. Dialbag, on the other hand, is genuinely trying to conduct original research in Shabad Yoga by studying the brainwaves of deep meditators within their community. They have even built a specially designed room that others and I witnessed firsthand. Dialbag has also devoted significant time and money to holding conferences on consciousness studies, including the one I attended with my wife Andrea. They have invited renowned scientists such as Sir Roger Penrose of Oxford University to give talks and have encouraged many in their community to pursue studies exploring the connection between quantum theory and the mind. This is altogether commendable. However, and my however here is a large one, Dialbag, like Beas, appears to have an underlying motive for why they are pursuing a neuroscientific understanding of consciousness, and it is not as objective and value-free as one might suspect. A recent official newsletter, Paratantrika, General Systems News, Volume 9, Number 1, January 2015, explains quite clearly what Dialbog's real agenda is all about. Dialbog and the Dialbog Educational Institute, or DEI, have a major role to play, and therefore a great responsibility devolves upon us to make Mission Radhaswami, that is to say, mission consciousness, fully successful. We pray to the Supreme Father that the Dialbog community and DEI rise to the occasion, because this is one way of making Radhaswami's spiritual philosophy a globally, scientifically accepted phenomenology. Earlier, people had tended to believe that, perhaps, someday, some top-notch scientist would get converted to consistent and complete philosophy of consciousness of Radhaswami faith, and experience the inner phenomenon of highest spirituality, and then, because of his authority, the rest of the world would accept his faith. But in the present world in which we live, even the highest Nobel laureate professing certain thought would not win over the entire world. So we have to convince the scientists by means of such integrationalist efforts as of holding conference series like the Tucson Study of Consciousness, or TSC, 2013, and continuing to participate in it at the world stage and publishing scientific documents on consciousness integrating Eastern and Western perspectives. Continuing such scientific exchanges seemed to be the only practical course in making universal appeal at the global level for the ultimate consciousness perspective of Radhaswami faith its due place in the evolving inner science of consciousness. The following quote from Sir Sahabji Maharaj, Sir Anand Sarup, fifth Reverend leader of Radhaswami faith, who, in 1915, established Dialbog as well as various educational institutions in Dialbog, which are now celebrating their centenary, 1915 to 2015, spells out the vision of our mission consciousness. May the radiance of satsang, meditation through Surat Shabda Yoga of the Eastern spiritual philosophy of saints, which has been kindled, be spread all over after we have left, so that mankind may know about your holy services and the magnificence and glory of our Supreme Father, resplendent in his abode, spread all over the cosmic universe. This is quite a revealing document, and underlines what others and I perceived when attending the Quantum and Nanocomputing Systems and Applications Conference in November of 2014. Simply put, Dialbog wants to legitimize Radhaswami theology in the scientific world, and believes it can do so by hosting and attending conferences on consciousness worldwide. On the surface, this looks very impressive indeed, except that Dialbog isn't interested in the pure and unadulterated study of consciousness per se, but rather in championing its own theonoustic paradigm. Would Dialbog, or Beas, actually accept and appreciate a neuroscientific finding that contradicted its own religious beliefs? I think not. In examining the Paratantrika newsletter closely, a number of key words and phrases stand out which plainly illustrate why Dialbog is so adamant in pursuing a scientific pathway to bolster its religious aims. 1. Dialbog is not taking a wait-and-see attitude in its understanding of consciousness when it equates mission consciousness as synonymous with Mission Radhaswami, followed with a supplicating prayer to the Supreme Father that the Dialbog community and DEI rise to the occasion, because this is one way of making Radhaswami's spiritual philosophy a globally, scientifically accepted phenomenology. Praying to a supreme deity to make sure your theory is accepted is contrary to the very essence of the scientific endeavor, particularly if one needs to be open to its refutation by experimentation. Given Dialbog's modus operandi, it appears that any finding that contradicted their a priori divine creed would be rejected or explained away. Substitute Mission Radhaswami with any other ism, such as Mission Mormonism, and you can readily see through the evangelical propaganda. 2. Holding and attending international conferences to understand the latest research on consciousness is praiseworthy. But to do so in order to convert others to Radhaswami's worldview is, to be polite, manipulative at best. Why even worry if a Nobel Prize winner or a top-notch scientist sides with your view if you are truly interested in the research because it is evidence, and not authority figures, that matters in the end? But Dialbog doesn't point to an open-ended inquiry when it admits continuing such scientific exchanges seems to be the only practical course in making universal appeal at the global level for the ultimate consciousness perspective of Radhaswami faith its due place in the evolving inner science of consciousness. If Dialbog was genuinely interested in making Radhaswami scientific, it would be heavily invested in finding out where and when it has been wrong in its theoretic orientations in the past. But not once in any of its sanctions presentations has a Dialbog researcher opened up this Pandora's box and asked the hard and necessary questions concerning mistakes that may have been made over time by its unique lineage of gurus. Instead, the Paratantrika newsletter posits its real agenda by quoting its fifth spiritual leader and the founder of its colony, Sir or Sri Anand Sarup, who detailed their scientific mission in purely theological terms when he exclaimed, "May the radiance of satsang, meditation through Surat Shabda Yoga of the Eastern spiritual philosophy of saints, which has been kindled, be spread all over after we have left, so that mankind may know about your holy services and the magnificence and glory of our Supreme Father, resplendent in his abode, spread all over the cosmic universe." This is perfectly fine for a religious dogma, but it shouldn't be confused with an open-ended and objective quest to understand the true nature of consciousness and its causation, particularly if anything that contravenes the stated theology is swept away as irrelevant to Mission Radhaswami. If Radhaswami really wants to be a science, then it has to do that which it has failed to accomplish so far: be willing to be wrong. In other words, Dialbog and Bayas cannot simply call themselves a science and not face the consequences of what that entails. They must, if they are serious in their quest, allow alternative and contravening interpretations of their inner experiences, and not merely reconfigure such to fit their metaphysical schema. I suspect that Dialbog and Bayas are not ready for such a radical endeavor. This is not to suggest that Radhaswami doesn't have anything to offer the scientific study of consciousness, because I think it has much to contribute. Dialbog, for instance, is definitely on the right track by developing sophisticated neural scanning machinery to study brain waves of advanced Shabad yoga meditators and reporting their findings. But they must be careful not to massage the resulting data to conform to a preset paradigm. To be sincere scientists, they must follow the evidence wherever it may lead them, even if it point-blank contradicts their fundamental belief system. I also believe that much of the religious mythology intertwined in Radhaswami has to be differentiated from its more universal aspects, lest one gets forever bogged down in unnecessary cultural baggage. The core of Radhaswami practice is Shabad Yoga, and this technique, clearly defined in its threefold method of Sinram, Dhyan, and Bhajan, offers much promise as a pathway to experience different and more lucid states of awareness. The experiences of Shabad yogis are undoubtedly a treasure trove waiting to be explored. Nevertheless, we should not prematurely pontificate about their significance, but rather encourage an open-ended inquiry into their ultimate meaning and purpose. Otherwise, we are engaged in a theological debate and not a scientific one. If Radhaswami wants to advertise itself as a science, then it is time for it to live up to its own hype and question its own foundations versus trying to saddle up exclusively on those findings that buttress their spiritual purview. For Radhaswami science to be worthy of such an exalted appellation, it should follow Charles Darwin's lead and point to how its pet theorizing can be upended. As Darwin warned about the mechanism of evolution by natural selection, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Do the Bayas and Dial-Bog's satsangs have any proviso that is even close to Darwin's about how their respective theories on spirituality could be wrong in light of future neuroscientific research? No, and this I would suggest reveals in a nutshell why Radhaswami's claims to be a science are deeply suspicious. As Richard Feynman explained about the scientific method in his famous 1974 commencement address at Caltech, there is one feature I noticed that is generally missing in cargo cult science. It's a kind of scientific integrity, a principle of scientific thought that corresponds to a kind of utter honesty, a kind of leaning over backwards. For example, if you're doing an experiment, you should report everything you think might make it invalid, not only what you think is right about it, other causes that could possibly explain your results, and things you thought of that you've eliminated by some other experiment and how they worked, to make sure the other fellow can tell they have been eliminated. Details that could throw doubt on your interpretation must be given if you know them. You must do the best you can, if you know anything at all wrong or possibly wrong, to explain it. If you make a theory, for example, and advertise it or put it out, then you must also put down all the facts that disagree with it, as well as all those that agree with it. There is also a more subtle problem. When you have put a lot of ideas together to make an elaborate theory, you want to make sure, when explaining what it fits, that those things it fits are not just the things that gave you the idea for the theory, but that the finished theory makes something else come out right in addition. In summary, the idea is to try to give all of the information to help others to judge the value of your contribution, not just the information that leads to judgment in one particular direction or another. While I certainly applaud and encourage Dial-Bog's repeated efforts to have Shabad yoga experimentation taken seriously, I think they must in turn contemplate seriously about how their particular view of higher states of consciousness, as revealed by their founder and in their holy writings, could be mistaken and how their own theological viewpoint could be changed. In this regard, I think they should follow the Dalai Lama's lead concerning his openness to science, disproving certain theological tenets in Tibetan Buddhism. As Carl Sagan, the noted astronomer and skeptic, wrote concerning the Dalai Lama, in theological discussions with religious leaders, I often ask what their response would be if a central dogma of their faith were disproved by scientific discipline. When I put this question to the Dalai Lama, he unhesitatingly replied, as no traditionalist or fundamentalist religious leaders do. In such a case, he said, Tibetan Buddhism would have to alter. Even, I asked, if it's a really central tenet, like reincarnation? Even then, he replied. Chapter 4. The Guru Has No Turban. Why Perfect Masters Don't Exist. Thesis. It seems obvious that our gurus, prophets, and sages are much more human than we wish to believe. Yet, despite all the indicative signposts that clearly demonstrate the frailties of our beloved religious figures, we persist in inflating them to wholly unreasonable heights of glory. One of the more celebrated, if inappropriate, honorifics we have bestowed on our chosen gurus is the term perfect master. It may be one thing to call a teacher a master. He or she may know more than us in a certain subject, but it is quite another to call such mastery perfect. The first and most troublesome problem is one of definition. What do we actually mean by perfect? My sense is that we fundamentally misunderstand the honorific, and we do not fully understand the implications involved when applying such terms to living human beings. My argument is a very simple one. The guru is not perfect, at least not in the ways that we may assume. But despite the fact that we can easily demonstrate the limitations and fallibilities of our gurus, we somehow hold on to the naive concept that a guru can be an all-knowing and all-powerful being. In writing this series, I had two options. One, to write a third-person narrative and keep a somewhat detached voice, pointing out the inherent mistakes we make when saying the guru is God. Or two, writing a first-person narrative, more or less, in which I take my own spiritual tradition to task by citing certain empirical examples of how the guru is not all-knowing or all-powerful. I have opted for the latter course, knowing fully well that I am going to offend many people in the process, particularly my friends and maybe even myself. But let me say right at the outset that I am not anti-guru or anti-Shabbat yoga. Rather, I am very fond of my own guru and my own path, but I have come to realize that there is way too much hyperbole and too much ideological work going on when it comes to perfect masters. In short, if I may invoke the vernacular, the subject of perfect gurus is replete with BS. So much so that clear thinking on the subject has given way to cultic silliness. I think we are much better served by critically accepting the humanness of our perfect gurus than in intellectually torturing ourselves with spiritual gymnastics, such as, no, my guru is not yawning because he is tired. God can't yawn. But because he is swallowing up the disciples' karmas. Yep, this was told to me in India by an earnest devotee who didn't blink in the telling. Let us start with the first order of silliness. The master has a perfect body. The body. Number 1. Although a large number of devotees in Shabbat yoga traditions will accept the physical limitations of their respective gurus, there is still a significant contingency that will implicitly, and at times explicitly, argue that the guru does indeed have a perfect body, whatever that may mean. I still fondly recall meeting a young man who got really upset and left his spiritual path after finding out that his guru was bald. He told me that a true guru cannot go bald, and when he saw his guru without his turban, he was shocked. No hair. When I tried to counter-argue with him that the guru's body is just that, a body like yours or mine, he didn't buy it. In fact, he went on, yeah, not only is my guru bald, but he also wears glasses. How can God wear glasses? Number 2. It so happens that many middle-aged gurus have a bulging waistline. They have what my father had, a growing pouch. But unlike my father, who knew his increasing girth was due to late-night binges of ice cream and candy bars, certain disciples feel that the guru is fat for a spiritual reason. You see, it is just not kosher to say, yeah, my guru is getting fat. He likes to eat and doesn't get much exercise. A pretty solid explanation. Rather, some argue that there must be a higher reason or meaning. These range from, oh, he awakened his kundalini, and that is why his stomach is pot-shaped. When the Shakti pot arises, the stomach protrudes. My guru is not fat. He is literally eating the disciples' karmas in his own stomach. The God-man is not fat. He is full of life in the solar plexus. Number 3. I have met a number of gurus whose disciples claim that they are God in the flesh, who have been physically ill or sick. I remember meeting with Agram Prasad Mathur at his home in People Mandi, Agra, India, and noticed that he was not feeling well. Now, from my perspective, it looked like Agram was suffering from a bad cold or flu. I felt sorry for him since his health was not up to par. Yet his disciples didn't say, yeah, Guru has a bad cold. Rather, there were all sorts of dramatic explanations revolving around karma. You see, Dave, the master is taking on the karmas of his disciples, and he is literally paying off their debt in his own body. He is so compassionate. The master himself, of course, never suffers. He is always enjoying the divine inner bliss. Well, that's a nice way of explaining away Agram's obvious suffering, but such metaphysical trapeze work seems to me a long-winded way of avoiding the obvious. The guru is sick. That's okay. Most of us get sick from time to time, but we don't need to resort to non-credible theories for why we are sick. Indeed, if the guru's body is simply the manifestation of eating karma, then when he is healthy, it is no different than when he was sick. Yet it is precisely when he is sick that the disciple wheels out the elaborate explanation for why he is in such a state. In the sociology of knowledge, there is a nice phrase for this kind of posturing: ideological work, the attempt to reconcile a discrepancy between theory and praxis. That is, what do you do when your theology demands a certain ideal and the actual example of it cannot, and does not live up to it. One then is forced by the searing breach to engage in ideological work. The bigger the gap between the ideal and the example, and the more mentalistic footwork that is demanded. For instance, if one is brought up in a spiritual tradition where the guru is seen as merely mortal, there is not much difficulty when he or she gets a cold or flu. Hey, she's just sick. No need to elaborate. But in traditions where the guru is elevated to almighty status, there can be potential difficulties when the guru shows signs of physical weakness. I remember noting that one esteemed guru in India seemed to get regularly ill after conducting mass initiations. The unofficial buzz around the ashram was that the guru was taking on the new initiate's karma. Naturally, I had a different hunch of the situation. I noticed that thousands of people would get really close to him during this time, and invariably, a few of them had colds or other contagious ailments. I thought to myself that this was the underlying cause for the guru's illness, since I even seemed more prone to getting colds and the like after interacting with large groups of people, particularly when dealing with college students in conferences. Then there are those embarrassing things that gurus do, like pick their nose. In India, especially in the Punjab, I have noticed a lot of gurus picking their nose, and I do mean picking. Why? It's dusty. Now this is where I would expect some karmic relief theory to be brought out. No, the guru is picking away at dirt of our soul, and his nose is simply the symbol of it. However, I have yet to hear a karmic explanation for nose picking. Maybe it is too obvious or too personal or too funky, but I most certainly do hear karmic theories for colds, for yawning, for back troubles, etc. My sense is that some things are too bodily obvious to demand an ideological work. No, the guru doesn't pee for himself. He is simply whizzing our sins down the toilet. Number 4. Let's talk about how gurus eat. I have a dear memory of my own guru eating a particularly sweet Indian delicacy known as jalebi. He seemed to genuinely relish it. I like jalebis myself, especially when they are fresh and hot, so I had no trouble understanding why he enjoyed the dessert. They are good. But when I talked later about my guru's eating habits, one disciple chimed in and said, "No, the guru doesn't even taste food. He does not allow his consciousness to descend below Trikuti, the second inner region in the cosmology of Neo-Santism. Thus he is only aware of those things beyond the senses or mind." Yeah, I mused to myself, sure. That's why he is eating the sweetest thing on the menu, bro, and probably the least healthy as well. I have a truly simple explanation for the guru's eating habits. He eats what he likes, just as most of us do. Kirpal Singh, founder of Rouhani Satsang, liked to drink Coca-Cola, and not just one or two. It actually made me think higher of Kirpal Singh. I thought it was cool that he drank Coke, but for some disciples, not Robert Leverant, the source of my story, who had no problem with it, Kirpal Singh's Coke drinking needed explaining. The God-man can't just drink Coca-Cola for its own sake, especially since it appeared to contradict his missives on not drinking aerated liquid. But there has to be some deeper or higher purpose for it. I got a much simpler one. He was thirsty. Ajaib Singh, one of Kirpal Singh's more celebrated successors, drank a Campa Cola right in front of me. Coca-Cola had been banned by this time, 1978, and one could only get it on the black market. Don't ask how I know. I could tell by watching him that he dug it and he drank it in one huge gulp. I didn't dare ask him why, since I wanted one too. Then Ajaib Singh let out an apparently satisfying burp. Totally understandable. Any divine reasons? I got one. Too much gas. The mind. Number 5. I have yet to meet a perfect master who has a perfect mind. As Ken Wilber once rightly stated, I am paraphrasing, I have never seen a perfect guru run a sub-4-minute mile with his perfect body, or explain Einstein's theory of relativity with his perfect mind. Fakir Chand point-blank stated that he didn't know when his form appeared to disciples worldwide, whether in meditation, in times of distress, or even in dreams. Fakir argued that these projections were products of one's own mind, lower or higher, dream or astral, etc., and that the guru herself does not consciously project in the mind of the neophyte. Indeed, the guru may not even have a clue that the disciple is thinking about him or her. I recall getting a phone call from a Catholic woman in Oklahoma, I believe, who got my number from the editors of Fate magazine. Apparently she had been praying or meditating one day, and she had a vision of a guru with a long white beard and a turban, who informed her that she would learn more about him that day. Later she happened to pick up a copy of Fate magazine, which contained an article I wrote entitled The Enchanted Land, A Journey with the Saints of India, which described my visits with various Shabad yoga gurus in India. When she saw the picture of Charan Singh that accompanied the article, she was thrilled since, as she alleges, it was this same Charan Singh who had appeared to her during her prayer or meditation. She was so enthralled, in fact, that she tracked me down and asked for more information. Being somewhat skeptical by nature of transpersonal or paranormal happenings, even when connected with my path, I advised her to write a letter to Charan Singh about it and ask his opinion. She did, and a few weeks later he wrote her a long reply in which he stated that the vision was, more or less, a projection of her own mind and that he had nothing to do with it. I realize that parapsychological and occult literature is replete with knowing by locations, but my hunch is that even if we accept some of these as authentic, and that is, of course, a huge leap, better to closely examine the conditions and the context surrounding the transmundane happening, the vast majority of inner visions and the like are indubitably linked with our own, and not some exterior, consciousness. I don't think the Virgin Mary is on hold right now waiting to be called so that she can make an appearance on a flour tortilla somewhere. Moreover, I don't think Elvis is hanging out at the end of a tunnel to greet his followers. What you see is what you bring to the neurological, mystical, you choose, picnic. The galaxy of cosmic characters, I would imagine, are not baking pie, waiting for some glub from Duarte to have a car accident just so they can make a divine appearance. In my 30-plus years in this field, I have seen nothing of the kind. I have seen, of course, some really impressive people and some really beautiful acts of kindness, free food, free hospitals, free eye camps, etc. But I have yet to see an airtight case for all-knowingness. I have seen too many examples of unknowingness, and no facade of humility can fully cover it up. And that is not to fault the guru in question, since in some cases he or she was chosen for the role against his or her will or desire. Just read Treasure Beyond Measure for an illustration of this. But the theological constraints which do not allow for letting the guru be just as he is, a human being. It is their humanity manifested in good acts or kind gestures or selfless service which is truly impressive, not the unproven idea that they are all-powerful and all-knowing. If such gurus are in fact all-knowing, they do a lousy job of showing it. How else can we explain the following? An esteemed master mistaking Disneyland's fake flowers for real ones. This interesting moment is captured on film. A master addressing a woman as sir, only to be corrected by the woman in public. A master instructing a woman in a letter to talk with her college teacher before writing him in the first place. The glitch here is that the woman did talk with me first, and I told her to write to him. A master forgetting that the person he is talking with had already been initiated by him. He queried, "How do you know the 5 names if you have not been initiated?" His reply, "But I was." A master incorrectly stating facts and dates of history, only to be corrected by a member of the audience. A master writing about a genealogical connection between gurus and stating it as fact only to have future scholars prove that the assertion is historically impossible. I could go on, and these are merely minor incidents to be sure, but the list of examples is huge. Of course, all of this is normal if we accept the idea that the guru is human. But it becomes downright strange if we think the guru is all-knowing, because then we are stuck with lots of explaining to do. Ideological Work 101. the very thing we shouldn't have to do if the guru demonstrated his or her all-knowingness. And the claim that the guru is merely being humble just doesn't pass the litmus test, because more often than not, that simple humility can be retranslated as outright lying. I have talked with lots of Shabad yoga gurus in my time, and though a few are genuinely brilliant, it does so happen that even their verbal responses are error-prone. Again, completely normal if we accept them as humans, completely abnormal if we think they are God. Property. I just don't get it. If the perfect master is one with Anami Purush, the transcendental Lord, then why does he give a hoot about some property in Agra, India? You see, there has been a decades-long legal battle, an occasional fistfight between two Radhaswami groups, now known as Swamibag and Dialbag, in Agra, India, over worship rights at Shiv Dayal Singh's Samad. They have gone to Indian courts over this matter for some 50-plus years. It makes the length of the OJ trial seem like a weekend in comparison. And what are these lineages of perfect masters fighting over? Real estate. That's right. Who owns what, and who has the rights to utilize such? Geez, if you have access to all the real states, pun intended, of every known and unknown multiverse, I think it just might be possible to practice a little detachment and let go of the spiritual parking lot, huh? The fact that these perfect masters are not letting go of the lawsuits or the real, I am tempted to say illusory, estate speaks volumes to me personally. It sounds awful human to me, and no matter how you slice it, the Swamibag-Dialbag duel is human greed at its worst, except that it's disguised under spiritual worship rites. Typical human stupidity cannot be acknowledged for what it is in these turf wars. Instead, it has to be dressed up in theological garb as if the ultimate state of the cosmos really depended upon some minor piece of property in Uttar Pradesh. You know it is time for a Sant group to call it quits when it has to spend much of its time suing others over property rights. I would be impressed if just one of these groups would say, hey, you take the land, we'll meditate instead. Hasn't happened though. I guess those inner lights just don't compare with that water view over the polluted Jumna. If Sant is a structural science, an inherent higher potential within every human being, regardless of caste, creed, race, cola affiliation, as the various perfect masters proclaim, and not merely a cultural club to win property and influence friends, then they should start acting like it. Lighten up about the worldwide buildup of property. Lighten up about trying to trademark Shabad yoga terms. Yes, even certain groups in India are following the capitalistic model. Lighten up about trying to control the free flow of information. Just try reading the history of Shabad yoga from one of the respective lineages. Tell me how much you learn about the other groups. Not much, I can assure you. Lighten up because according to your own philosophy, the ultimate goal is not this place, but its radical transcendence. If transcendence is the case, then it is a bit mind-boggling to see how much concern there is in trademarks, property rights, money seva, and litigation over willed estates. To be sure, I understand why organizations indulge in such actions, but I don't think it exemplifies the universal teachings by trying to mimic Xerox or IBM or Microsoft. If my metaphorical friend Kabir was to reincarnate again, literalist beware, I am indulging in a parable, and he saw what has happened, I get a sneaky suspicion that he would be the first to throw rocks at the ashram's wall, perhaps shouting cryptically, "What does real estate got to do with going within? What do trademarks have to do with perennial truths? Why are perfect masters suing each other and their disciples in courts?" He may just say, "Hey, shut up and meditate." Postscript. Fakir Chand once commented to me that most of the perfect masters that he knew died in very imperfect ways. Fakir, to his credit, was merely stating the obvious, and unlike many of his counterparts, he saw no reason to lamely justify a dying guru's illness under the pretext that he or she was doing a karmic readjustment. Sawan Singh died of cancer. Kirpal Singh had prostate surgery. Charan Singh had heart problems. Jagat Singh was ill for much his tenure. People die. Perfect masters die. That cancer or heart problems or prostate difficulties is due to carrying the disciple's load of karma seems to me an unnecessary way to rationalize the humanness of how all gurus have died. Fakir Chand didn't know exactly when he was going to die, nor do I suspect that most gurus do. If Fakir Chand knew, then he certainly did a good job of hiding it from me. I talked with him on the phone just a few weeks before he died. He called me at my mom's house late one evening, and we had a delightful conversation, and I even made it a point to ask him about his health. He said that despite being older and weaker, he was otherwise doing fine. Just a couple of days later, though, he had a cardiac arrest and went into a coma. It is true that Fakir gave some signs that he was going to die, ranging from the often told story of how Fakir informed his friend in Delhi that he was going to come back in a black box from the USA to his lucid awareness just moments before expiring. But I don't think he knew exactly and precisely when he was going to die. Do we? Yes, I am sure there are some who have a better idea of when they are going to transpire than others. For instance, my own brother had a pretty good hunch and told me so. But I don't think the track record of perfect masters is that much better than plain ordinary folk. The primary difference, I have noticed, is that disciples just won't allow for unknowingness when it comes to their respective gurus dying. Rarely do I hear the following: "Yeah, my guru died completely unexpectedly. We didn't have a clue, and neither did he." Instead, we get lots of hagiography, the almost immediate embellishment of stories of how the guru really did know, but just gave hints. Darshan Singh was a genuinely nice person, and almost everybody I know who knew him liked him. But when he died in May of 1989, it came as a big surprise to even his close associates. Indeed, he had even planned for a summer tour in the USA, and thousands of dollars were spent promoting his tour, with his picture, by the way. Now, I am confident that disciples of Darshan Singh would argue that their master really had planned his exit all along, but that's not what it looks like from the outside. Thus, what do we really have here? Unknowing gurus posing as knowing masters and caught in the crossfire are naive and unsuspecting seekers, of all ages and from all sorts of backgrounds, believing that these very human beings are divinely connected. Unplug the projections and untie the turban. The guru is human. The guru is human. That mantra is the rational chant of those who have realized that Toto is the great revealer of the puffery and showmanship of the Wizard of Oz. And what did Toto reveal? That the great wizard was a small man hiding behind a curtain? Or more precisely, to fit in with our analogy, the guru has no turban, metaphorically akin to the parable of the emperor has no clothes. And all the images we project upon him or her are, at the end of the day, our own. The real guru, if there is such a beast, will perform Dasturbandi, the turban tying ceremony, on you and not on himself. The guru should be shaking underneath his turban if he is not what he claims to be. Perfection is precisely that, perfect, and any guru who uses such descriptions is worthy of our deep skepticism. Chapter 5. The Magic of an Elevated Podium, on the Illusion of a Flawless Guru Lineage. Thesis. It is a conceit, even if a well-grounded one, to believe that one's spiritual lineage is flawless. Indeed, the history of successorship, from kings to CEOs to gurus, has been replete with broken or brokered nexus points. What lineage does for us, albeit naively, is give us the illusion of something permanent, something traditional, and something legitimate. And no doubt, lineage can work as an important confidence booster for the would-be neophyte to trust his or her guru more. Yet the real problem in all of this is that guru recognition based on lineage is only a temporary confidence booster. Why? Because in order to know that one's guru lineage is flawless, one would have to be able to have access to an impeccable historical record. For instance, it may be true that Jaimal Singh to Sawan Singh's succession is well documented and has lots of supporting evidence. Of course, the Baba Singh contingency from Taran Taran at the time may have had a different spin on the whole affair, but it is also equally true that the Shiv Dayal Singh to Jaimal Singh's succession is much less historically verifiable, even though it may have just as strong a link as Jaimal to Sawan. Some succession episodes are extraordinarily clear. Darshan Singh's appointment of his eldest son, Rajinder, is by any measure one of the clearest and smoothest chapters in modern Shabad Yoga history. Yet the same cannot be said of Darshan Singh's succession of his father, Kirpal Singh, which was by any measure one of the ugliest chapters in modern Shabad Yoga history. You know you have a bad succession episode when guns start to replace diplomacy as the negotiating tool at the ashram. See The Emergence of a New Master Darshan Singh, edited by Malcolm Tillis for more. What becomes obvious by even the tiniest bit of historical reflection is precisely how little we really do know of the politics behind guru succession. As the cliché rightly states, history is written by the victors, and so too goes the booty, not the losers, even though it may be those very losers who were genuinely appointed. One may believe, for instance, that the Swamibag or People Mandi or Dialbag lineages are flawless, even if one stomachs the odd fact that Dialbag and Swamibag sued each other for some 50 years, and that Shiv Dayal Singh was the axis mundi for such perfection. Yet when we inspect how Shiv Dayal Singh eventually emerged as a guru, we find that we are on much less certain grounds. Who appointed him? Tulsi Saab? Well, if that is the case, then why do we not have any verifiable records? Moreover, why do the Agra lineages themselves deny any such guru link? Well, we don't really know the answer, but we can speculate several major possibilities. 1. Shiv Dayal Singh didn't succeed anybody. He started his ministry on his own. This is, by the way, essentially the Agra position, as argued by Dialbag, Swamibag, and People Mandi. Shiv Dayal Singh didn't succeed Tulsi Saab, but rather a disciple of his name Girdhari Das. Support for this interesting contention comes from a most unlikely source, Madhav Prasad Sinha, the last well-recognized guru at Swamibag and Shiv Dayal's nephew, who admitted that his uncle treated Girdhari more or less as a guru. 2. Shiv Dayal Singh did succeed Tulsi Saab, but for whatever reasons chose to keep relatively quiet about it. 3. Shiv Dayal Singh disputed the succession at Hathras when he was overlooked by the major faction of Tulsi's disciples, who apparently sided with Sir Swami. Sidebar: when I went to Hathras with Professor Juergensmeyer back in 1978, the then living Mahant told us that Shiv Dayal Singh took initiation from Tulsi Saab, but broke off later and started his own new panth, or way. Okay, so what's the upshot? No matter how flawless one may think their present lineage is, a closer inspection via history will, apparently without exception, reveal an odd chapter, an odd nuance, and an odd contradiction. So even though we may have relatively high confidence in 3 or 4 modern-day succession transferences, we do not, perhaps cannot, have the same confidence in earlier mastership transmissions. To be sure, we can have a belief or a faith that earlier episodes were not marked by animosity, deceit, or outright fraud, but we can apparently never fully know this. Hence, we have at the very best temporary confidence in our respective lineages. And I would suggest such confidence can too easily be undermined by a close attention to detail, even with present-day guru transmission. Let's say, for argument's sake, that you accept the Taran Taran lineage, obscure enough for most readers so nobody's feelings are going to get too hurt, as genuine or perfect, or quite simply, the right one, whatever those adjectives may suggest. The overarching epistemological question now is this: how does one know that this is the case? The argument goes along these lines. Baba Kuhar Singh, who is now the current head, was appointed by his father, Pratap Singh. Pratap Singh was appointed by Deva Singh. Deva Singh was appointed by Baba Singh. as well as Sawan Singh, who doubly confirmed the appointment. Baba Singh was appointed by Jaimal Singh. Jaimal Singh was appointed by Shiv Dayal Singh. Shiv Dayal Singh was appointed by Tulsi Saab. Tulsi Saab was appointed by who? Or is Kirpal's theory correct that Tulsi Saab's lineage traces all the way back through Guru Gobind Singh to Guru Nanak? Who was the Guru before Nanak? Who was his Guru's Guru, and so on, all the way back to a primordial Lucy? We face an intractable problem when we confront lineage, which is codified by the simple question, yeah, but who appointed him or her? A question which is followed to its logical conclusion will, invariably, take us back through time to the beginnings of the physical universe. Thus, the recognition of one's guru by lineage, I know my guru is genuine because so-and-so appointed him, is a false lead, since the starting point, apparently, can never be traced. And even if such a starting point could be traced, the tireless question of, yeah, but who appointed him or her, still lends itself to complex issues of ontology and epistemology. Ironically, therefore, guru recognition by lineage does not resolve the issue of whether one's guru is legitimate or genuine. That question, though perhaps temporarily postponed or historically relegated by issues of lineage, is one that each and every disciple of a guru confronts moment to moment, day to day, year to year. For in the case of the Radhaswami lineage at Taran Taran, there are even problems in its modern-day succession history, not the least of which is that Pratap Singh was apparently appointed only after Sadhu Singh, the one Deva Singh intended to have succeed him, left Taran Taran after internal politics at his guru's ashram forced him to start his own ministry, eventually setting in Firozpur. Teja Singh is now the head of his branch, which claims that all gurus from Jaimal Singh onwards are meant to be unmarried. Note, both Pratap and his son Kahar Singh were married, thus breaking the precedent of Jaimal, Bhaga, and Deva Singh. What all of this takes us back to, of course, is how we recognize a guru in the first place, and by what criteria we buttress our appraisements. The melting sands of guru recognition, or how love, chance, and residential boundaries circumscribe our choices of God, women, and men. Thus, lineage cannot be used as an absolute yardstick to determine the genuineness of a present-day guru, since history conceals from us the necessary certainty to know the ins and outs of each and every succession transference. Then by what criteria can we appraise the worthiness of our chosen gurus? Clearly, we can use any number of scales that we choose, even including lineage as part of them. However, all such scales will be at best imperfect and at worst highly misleading, since they may tend to give us a sense of confidence, if not arrogance, that is not wholly justified. Now I say all of this as one who has designed and advocated high standards for gurus. See my article, The Spiritual Crucible, in Exposing Cults When the Skeptical Mind Confronts the Mystical, 1994, and who obviously sees the merits in holding spiritual teachers accountable for their actions. However, it is also exceedingly clear to me how any and all such models are severely limited. The inherent problem, I would argue, with my spiritual crucible model or others like them is that they infer a sense of knowing and a sense of insight which is neither accurate nor true. Indeed, no matter how well a guru may pass even the severest of tests, there is always the possibility, even if scant, that he or she may be, or turn out to be, a fuck-up, to invoke Wilbur's wonderful description of the late Adi Da, aka Franklin Jones. We know this already in our own lives and in the lives of those with whom we are deeply associated. At the very moment we think we have understood our deepest self, there arises a condition or a context in which we behave in unpredicted and unexpected ways. We find that we are less than our own self-image. It is also true, to be fair, that we may rise to the occasion and be much better than we ever thought possible. But in this two-way street of unpredictability, we cross the same intersection. We don't know as much as we presume. And I would argue we know even less than that when it comes to our spiritual masters. For example, I was quite fond of Swami Muktananda for a number of years. I enjoyed his book, The Play of Consciousness, and thought that his restaurants, like Amrit, were wonderful. The tempeh burger was nectarine. I also thought that his lineage connection was somewhat clean. He was a disciple of Nityananda, and he made it quite clear that he was celibate, or at least that is what we were led to believe. Then in 1983, Co-Evolutionary Quarterly came out with a scathing inside look at Swami's private life, detailing his sexual escapades with American women. There were even reports of a secret tunnel in his Ganesh Puri ashram, which led directly from his room to the women's quarters. I was quite surprised. I never expected the Swami of such things. But that is precisely the point that I am attempting to drive home. We never do know all that much. And this caveat applies to all gurus, even the ones that appear squeaky clean. Even a spiritual master as esteemed as Ramakrishna may turn out to have clay feet, as controversially evidenced by Jeffrey Kripal's remarkable, if arguable, book, Kali's Child, University of Chicago Press. Kripal contentiously suggests that Ramakrishna was sexually abused as a child, and this trauma acted itself out later on in his adult life with his own young male disciples. I won't go into the details. A few of my students at Mount San Antonio College were horrified by the book, except to say that Kripal's interpretation makes one want to watch a guru's feet when he goes into samadhi. In addition, Mother Teresa, the admirable Catholic nun and Nobel Peace Prize winner, could be caught in less than honorable money-gathering circumstances. In the book, Missionary Position, the famous atheist author, Christopher Hitchens, severely criticizes the diminutive Mother Teresa for accepting several $1,000s from John Roger Hinkins, who the late Peter McWilliams alleges used death threats and other forms of violent intimidations against defectors to his spiritual movement, MSIA, or Movement for Spiritual Inner Awareness. Yet the disciples of such gurus are usually not privy to the inside details surrounding the private lives of their spiritual teachers. Indeed, even those associates who do not forge a close bond can still be left in the dark about the more personal affairs of their guru. See the expose of Krishnamurti's apparent affair with a married woman disciple as just one suggestive illustration of this. What these revelations force us to do is confront anew our own relationship with why we are following our guru in the first place. It is a why, I would suggest, that is pregnant with possibilities. One answer to this query that I have heard over the years is this: I follow my guru because he is not only wise, but because so Baba, who was obviously enlightened, transmitted his spiritual power to him. Yet how do we know this to be the case? We don't know this, as I have suggested, by lineage, an endless query with no apparent resolution. We don't know this because we have inspected every nook and cranny of the guru's life. We haven't even inspected every recess of our own lives and found it without blemishes. We don't know this because the previous guru was enlightened. We don't know this because we have tested every guru in the marketplace. Even in the restricted field of Shabad Yoga, this would prove to be a nearly impossible task, since we have hundreds of light and sound teachers offering their services. Do we have all their addresses? I suspect, in some, that we really don't know. To be sure, there will be those who will argue for the verticality of their mystical encounters with Sri Guru Sohai, but such assertions, though not to be discounted ad hoc, also raise a whole new series of questions which are perhaps more intractable than their empirical counterparts. How do we know it was the guru in question and not our own self? How do we know that other gurus wouldn't work better? It may turn out that we follow our respective gurus for some mundane reasons, some of which are not as pretty or illuminating when cast in the stark daylight of rationality. Do we really know our gurus so well and so intimately that we are absolutely certain about their relative spiritual status? Or are we merely extrapolating from our own limited experience with them, and by elevating them to spiritual heights, glorifying ourselves in the process? The Cosmetics of Guruship. Exploring the makeup of one spiritual teacher. As far as we know, the Pope could be, for all intents and purposes, a real scoundrel, though this does not appear to be the case, but I have no way of fully knowing. Yet for millions of Catholics worldwide, the Pope is the vicar of Christ on this planet, and he garners tremendous respect in that role. But I suspect that what we might respect about the Pope is not merely his humanity, does television truly capture such things, but rather the status of his office. The Pope almost invariably speaks both metaphorically and very often literally on an elevated podium, whether it be in a special car, a special outfit, or a special stage. As I once told a friend of mine, it sure seems like perceived charisma has a lot to do with how well it is packaged. It may at first glance seem like a silly analogy, but think of movie stars versus television stars. One of the reasons, but surely not the sole one, that certain people are awestruck by Brad Pitt is because of the context in which they first saw him. He has appeared on a pretty big screen, much larger than life size, and in a darkened room. Well, the machinery behind movie stars has a huge part to play in how we ultimately perceive them as content or as personalities. I am not so sure that the supposed charisma of movie stars is at all inherent. Indeed, I tend to believe that charisma is more a manufactured product that we have somehow mistakenly mislabeled as some sort of ineffable personal trait. Let's get back to gurus. The moment you put a turban on a guy, stick him up on an elevated podium, and have thousands of adoring devotees listening to his every word as if it was a divine revelation, it is bound to have an impact on the newcomer who has no seasoned clue about the spiritual heights of the talking Swami. Yet that's the kicker. Think of all the spiritual masters we have honored throughout history. Why such honor? Is it because we have really done the research and truly know the inner and outer attainments of the master? Not very likely. It may well be that we honor many of these spiritual leaders only because of the trappings surrounding them. Let's take the most infamous of gurus, the late Thakur Singh. Let's imagine you know nothing of his sordid past, abusing women and children, etc., and that he is giving a satsang in front of 30,000 earnest disciples in Chandigarh, India. Let's further imagine that you are on a quest and that this is the first time you have ever been to India. You see this guru on an elevated platform, a given if the crowd is that big, and you listen to him speak in Hindi. You don't know the language, and thus can't tell that Thakur is a real bore as a lecturer. Moreover, everybody is pressed up against you in this tight arena, and the devotion is thick. Some are crying, some are riveted, some are meditative, and the air has a certain peculiar smell, different than anything you have sensed before. And to top it off, the underlying premise is that the turbaned guru on the elevated platform is God in human form. Well, this scene, or something like it, has happened innumerable times in India and elsewhere. It is probably happening right now as you read this, but you know something about this scene that the naive seeker does not. Thakur is a scumbag. Now it is exactly in our naiveness, a condition that never may leave us, by the way, in which we might impute power and majesty upon the guru on the dais. Yet in this example, we know that the turbaned one has neither. We are the ones elevating the guru. We are the ones giving him charisma. We are the ones, in sum, doing the magic, mistaking an image for its reality, mistaking an effect for its cause. Okay, forget Thakur. Now let's put somebody up there on the dais really impressive, really cool, really sincere. Is it that much different? Really? Why? Criminal or saint, we are doing most of the mental gymnastics. Don't get me wrong. It is easier to get a mystical charge for a guru who looks and acts the part. Pee Wee Herman in a turban versus Alex Guinness in a turban, for instance. But the hard wiring is all our own. And in the midst of all this, we still don't know that much about the best of gurus. We know, rather, much of the buzz, the staging, the infrastructure interplay. And we have been, consciously or otherwise, seduced by the whole affair into believing we have more certainty than we actually do. The seduction is the game. And I am not at all sure that we know who the real seducer is. I think, to be frank, that we are mesmerized by the theater in which these gurus appear and that we have mistaken the medium for the messenger. We have, in other words, bought the picture because of the beauty of the frame. We have given ultimate value to the cheap stone because it happens to be inlaid in what we perceive as pure gold. And in being persuaded by the wonderful staging, lighting, and sets, we just happen to think the actor is a star, whereas in actual practice, the understudy could have done the job just as well. Let me punchline this. If you think your guru is God and he appoints some guy as his successor, the odds are that you will think highly of him, even if you have not a clue who the guy is. The successor could be, for all we know, a complete loser. The guru screwed up on his choice and he chose an airhead. How many of us are going to recognize that immediately? Or are we instead going to mainline the successor like a new drug and take the hit anyways? Well, we already have a pretty good answer. We have mainlined the predecessors without inspection. Remember lineage? And the same holds true in many cases for the successors. The drug does work. Perceived guru charisma can generate a tremendous high, but we have mistakenly thought that the paraphernalia and the substance were one and the same. Or more accurately, we failed to distinguish the guru from his elevated podium. We bought into the cosmetics as if such makeup were the real face. We don't really know about the real face of our own selves, much less the guru some 100 yards away lecturing in Urdu. We are pretty adept, however, at blushing when we see a pretty guru dressed to kill, not stopping to reflect that a good dose of Noxzema will reveal the true nature of a Crawford-like mole. It is that very mole, I would suggest, that demands some more inspection. But in order to do that, we need to leave off the cosmetics and get at the blemished face. That is, we need to sink the elevated podium, shave off the beard, deturban the head, rip off the third eye patch, unplug the automatic lineage legitimizer, get a good translator, and take a Stridex pad and wipe clean the accumulated glossing sheen pasted on by the hype police. We need, in other words, to see the guru just as he or she is, devoid of the costumes and jewels. We need to see the guru naked. Be forewarned, it may not be a pretty sight, but then again, how beautiful are we naked? Or do we, in ways not so subtle, wish to see our gurus in romantic costume, dressed up by our own uninspected desires and projections? I must admit that seeing gurus unadorned can be quite a sight. What might we see in the pantheon of Shabbat yoga masters if we went into their dressing rooms? What would strike our eye, or our ear, or our heart as odd, as unbecoming, as human? Can we accept that humanness while at the same time not condoning it? Can we love our guru while at the same instant critiquing him or her? Can we admire some features of the guru play while at the same moment argue for a new scene? Can we, in sum, be discriminating in our love? Or do we doom ourselves to the either or arena of guru adoration? The fictional Judas says to Jesus, "I will kill you myself with my bare hands if you are not the Messiah." Jesus is the one who is scared of Judas, not the other way around. The guru should be fearful of the disciples' wrath. The guru should be shaking in his or her proverbial boots, lest he be less than what they think. The guru is nothing but the idealized version of our own quest for transcendence. The acceptance of a guru's highs and lows, and the clear demarcation of both, is proportional to the honesty of the disciple. The naked guru does not come in peace. He comes in pieces, shattered images of what he is not, but more accurately, of what we are not. About the author. David Christopher Lane has been a professor of philosophy at Mount San Antonio College for over 27 years. He has taught at the University of California, San Diego, California State University, Long Beach, California School of Professional Psychology, and the University of London in England, among other institutions. Professor Lane received his PhD and MA with a focus on the sociology of knowledge from the University of California, San Diego, where he was also a recipient of a Regents Fellowship. He also received another MA in the history and phenomenology of religion from the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley. Dr. Lane has written a number of books, including several controversial studies on new religions, such as The Making of a Spiritual Movement, The Untold Story of Paul Twitchell and Eckankar, Exposing Cults, When the Skeptical Mind Confronts the Mystical, and D.A., The Strange Case of Franklin Jones, co-authored with Dr. Scott Lowe, professor of religious studies at the University of Wisconsin. Much of Professor Lane's research has been centered on how certain spiritual traditions in India, such as Radhaswami and Sikhism, have impacted the evolution of new religions in America. This has resulted in a number of published articles and books, including his text, The Radhaswami Tradition, A Critical History of Guru Succession. When he was in his early 20s, Lane served as a research assistant to Professor Mark Juergensmeyer, then at Berkeley, now Professor of Global Studies at UCSB, in North India to help him in his groundbreaking study on the history of Radhaswami and Shabad Yoga-related groups. Princeton University Press published Lane's research and comprehensive genealogical trees tracing various guru lineages in Juergensmeyer's Radhaswami Reality in 1991. Dr. Lane is most well known for his critical studies of certain new religious founders, including the late John Roger Hinkins of Movement for Spiritual Inner Awareness, Satya Sai Baba, and Sri Gary Olson of Masterpath. This unsettling research has led to the robbery of his home, numerous death threats, and a series of targeted lawsuits. His work has been widely cited in various encyclopedias and has served as the foundation for a number of investigative studies, including Peter McWilliams' widely read cult expose, Life 102, What to Do When Your Guru Sues You. Professor Lane was the first scholar to publish the life and work of Baba Fakir Chand under the title The Unknowing Sage, which details the remarkable life of an Indian sage who claimed that all miracles and religious visions were projections of disciples' own mind, but they unwittingly gave credit for such to their respective gurus and religious traditions. Lane has been instrumental in publishing a number of books and articles on Fakir's radical revelations and has coined the term Chandian effect to describe how extraordinary experiences occur even though they ultimately have a scientific explanation. Most recently, Dr. Lane has focused his research on neuroscience, quantum theory, and evolutionary biology. He has been keenly interested in consciousness studies and was a featured speaker at 2 international conferences held in Agra, India at the Dialbag Educational Institute on exploring the physiological foundations behind self-reflective awareness. 2 of his most recent books in this regard are entitled Is the Universe an App? And Mysterium Tremendum. Professor Lane has also created over 100 original short films on such subjects as probability theory, Darwinian evolution, and the future of technology in education. Dr. Lane also has a very large website which he started back in 1993 entitled The Neural Surfer. On a personal note, Professor Lane is an avid surfer and body surfer, having won the World Body Surfing Contest in 1999 and the International Body Surfing Contest at Manhattan Beach 7 times, from 1997 to most recently in 2015. Dr. Lane is married to Dr. Andrea Diem, who's also a professor of philosophy at Mount San Antonio College. They have 2 children together, Sean Michael and Kelly Joseph.